Welcome to the Renaissance, new ideas and art. In this episode, we'll be looking at Renaissance humanism, our guiding question. How did Renaissance writers rely on the past to develop new ideas? In the 1300s and 1400s, European scholars developed a new way of understanding the world called humanism. It was based on ancient Greek and Roman ideas. Humanists, as these scholars were called, gave importance to the individual and to human society. They wanted to gain knowledge through reason, not just through religious faith. Humanism encouraged people to be active in their cities and to develop their talents. The humanists made important advances, new forms and styles of literature and art, technological inventions in cartography, engineering and printing, and new theories in science, mathematics, human anatomy, and astronomy changed the world. Scientific revolution scholars and Enlightenment thinkers built on these advances with their own achievements in the centuries that followed. I'd like to introduce you to Francesco Petrarch, who's considered the father of humanism. He lived from 1304 to 1374 through the worst bouts of the plague. He lost many of his family and friends to the plague. Petrarch was a poet and scholar with a keen interest in the classics and their authors. Some people call him the first tourist because he traveled all around Europe, searching through libraries and monasteries for lost classic manuscripts. Among his finds were two speeches by Cicero. Petrarch wanted to meld the lessons he learned from the classic authors, which was rich promise, with the teachings of the church, which is divine fulfillment. The result was humanism. Petrarch's research and poetry was one spark in the development of the Renaissance. For most of the Middle Ages, Western Europeans knew very little about the writings of ancient Rome and Greece. However, during the Crusades, they came in contact with the Middle East. Arab Muslim scholars there and in Spain knew about the classic Greek and Roman writings. They passed on their knowledge to the Western Europeans. Byzantine scholars also brought classic works to Italy. After Petrarch found these old Latin manuscripts, scholars throughout Europe followed his example. In time, new libraries were built to hold the newly found manuscripts. The largest of these libraries was the Vatican, the home of the Pope in Rome. Italians also began to value the ancient buildings and statues all around them. Throughout Rome, workers removed dirt and rubble from damaged columns and statues. Artists then eagerly studied the proportion of ancient works. For example, artists compared the length of a statue's arms to its height. They believed this comparison could tell them why the statues looked perfect. A new literature. In addition to studying the classics, humanists in Italy and other parts of Europe made important achievements of their own. One of their contributions was new forms of literature. During the Renaissance, educated Europeans wrote in the classical Latin used in ancient Rome. However, they also began writing in the vernacular, which means the everyday language people spoke in its region. Vernacular languages included Italian, French, and German. For example, Petrarch used Italian to write sonnets or short poems, which expressed his love for a woman who died from the Black Plague. Many more people could read works written in the vernacular instead of in Latin. Publications of the Christian Bible in vernacular languages allowed people to read it themselves without depending on church officials. This was an important basis for the Reformation. In the early 1300s, a poet from Florence named Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy. It is known as one of the world's greatest poems. Written in the vernacular, it tells of a person's journey from hell to heaven. The poem describes the horrible punishments for different sins. The English writer Geoffrey Chaucer also wrote popular vernacular literature. Chaucer wrote his famous work, The Canterbury Tales, in English. The Canterbury Tales is a collection of stories told by pilgrims on a religious journey to the town of Canterbury, England. In his work, Chaucer portrayed the entire range of English society. His work shows both nobles at the top of society and the poor at the bottom. The English we speak today comes from the form of English that Chaucer used in his writing. Speaking of writing, let's look at Gutenberg's printing press. The printing press helped spread humanist ideas throughout Europe. In the early 1450s, a German printer named Johannes Gutenberg developed a printing press that used movable metal type. The new press held individual carved letters that could be arranged to form words and then could be used again. As a result, books could be quickly printed by machine rather than slowly written by hand. The Chinese had already invented movable type. However, their written language had so many characters that the movable type system did not work well. For Europeans, the printing press was a great advance. It was easy to use on linen paper, another invention from China. Gutenberg's printing press made many more books available to people. Its invention came at a time when many townspeople were learning to read and think for themselves. Scholars could read each other's works and discuss their ideas, often in letters. Ideas developed and spread more quickly than ever before in Europe. In 1455, Gutenberg produced the first European printed book, the Christian Bible, on his new press. Soon, many books became available in Europe. In fact, more books were printed in the first 50 years of printing than were written by hand in the entire history of the world up to 1450. What effect did humanism have on society? Humanist scholars were curious about subjects such as biology, medicine, and astronomy. Scholars' study of mathematics helped them in many areas of knowledge. One of the leading Renaissance scientists was also a great artist, Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci cut open dead bodies to learn more about the human body. He studied fossils to understand Earth's early history. Da Vinci was also an inventor and an engineer. Most of what we know about Da Vinci comes from his notebooks. Da Vinci filled the papers of his notebooks with notes and sketches of his scientific and artistic projects. These drawings often pictured parachutes, flying machines, and other mechanical inventions so far ahead of his time. Check your understanding. Identify causes. How were the Italian scholars able to rediscover ancient Roman and Greek works? Determine context. Why was the printing press so much more successful in Europe than it was in China? Catch you next time when we will be looking at Renaissance artists. Arrivederci.